In this video, we're going to talk about sanding. The first thing we'll do after we've installed a new floor is sand it with 60 grit paper. This is to level off the floor. The floor may be uneven due to subfloor issues that were remaining or the milling of the wood. When we have wood that is higher than another piece of wood, this is called overwood. We need to flatten this out before we can do anything else with the floor. The piece of equipment we use to sand is an 8-inch belt sander and a 7-inch floor edging machine. We will be using 60 grit paper on both machines. This machine runs on 220 volts and weighs about 350 pounds. The weight is an important feature here. This is one of the key things that will separate a professional job, the equipment that's used to sand the floor. On our first cut with the belt sander, we will be using the 60 grit paper, moving on a 2 to 5% angle. This is to ensure that we get the floor as flat as we possibly can with the heavier equipment. As we come up to the edge of the wall, we will be feathering the floor out. We cannot get to the end of the wall with the belt sander. This is where the edger comes into play. With the edger, we try to go with the grain as much as possible. But in some areas where the wood runs into the wall, we do have to go across the grain. This takes away the feathering that was created by the belt sander. In this step of the process, we would lay out our stain samples if we're going to be staining a floor. So what we do is go through the entire process and finish sanding the floor in these areas. We lay out a grid pattern with some tape, we water pop the floor, we apply the stain, and we apply 2 coats of finish and let them dry. This will ensure that we can show our clients exactly what the color will look like. We will explain the staining process more in another video. After the stain samples are laid down, we will use a full trowel filler. Complete coverage when using this is very important. The filler is meant to fill in any nail holes or imperfections that are left in the floor from the installation. The next step in the sanding process is to switch our paper over to 100 grit on both the edger and the belt sander. We will follow the same exact procedures as we did with the 60 grit, except this time we're going to be removing all of the filler that we've put on the floor. The filler also helps us to see if there's any low spots in the floor that we can level off with this sanding process. The main purpose of the 100 grit sandpaper is to remove all of the filler off the floor and to remove any sanding marks left from the 60 grit. If we have any flush mount vents in the floor, we will also sand those with this grit. As I stated before, we will be staining this floor. Stain takes a lot of extra work. It's not just in the actual staining process, but the amount of sanding that needs to happen in order for the floor to look good. The heavier equipment of the edger will leave swirl marks along the edge of the floor. Swirl marks would not be visible on a natural floor, but as soon as you introduce color into the grain, any marks are very visible. How we remove these is with a small hand sander and a light. We place the light on the side of the floor so that we can see all of the marks and imperfections left from the edger, and we hand sand these items out. We also will use a corner sander to get into any of the areas that our smaller hand sander does not reach. Our last step in sanding is the use of a satellite. The satellite attaches to our buffer, which is a low-speed 175 RPM machine with 6 4-inch discs on it. We will be using 120 grit paper on this satellite. The satellite serves 2 main purposes. Number 1, to blend in all of the sanding marks left from the different machines, and number 2, to completely flatten and even out the floor. And that completes the sanding process.